My name is Maksym Rokmaniko, and I'm the director of the Center for Spatial Technologies. We used to be a Kyiv-based group. Now we're here. Just before we start, I wanted to mention that the trust space is quite special for me. It's the space that has always been quite dear and run by friends, and it's also been quite helpful in some of the work that we're doing. And everything that I'm going to show is the work of a collective of the CST, the Center for Spatial Technologies. The work that we used to do in the past is quite hacking oriented, so we all come from architecture, and we used architectural techniques to understand things beyond the realm of architecture. A lot of the work has to do, or used to have to do, with issues of housing in the city. So this is a model that we did for the project that we did together with Dark Matter Labs in London, where we basically looked at how public investment on a case study of Highline in New York results in massive private gains that is a result of a property value uplift. So we looked at correlation in terms of how close these properties were to Highline and how much they went up in price. This is the apartment that we renovated and turned into a kind of our improvised office in Kyiv. We thought we should understand very well what that renovation process means, so we recorded every single element that we had to purchase for this process. We did a bunch of exhibitions with this little project, but in the core of it there was this desire to understand how much things costed, how much embodied carbon the elements basically have stored in them. So this work was funded by a Climate Kick, which is a big European fund that funds green projects, and we with them thought about this question of what is a standard renovation process and what kind of environmental impact it has, and what is the distribution in terms of all the elements that you buy in terms of carbon footprint. So this was very simple, but I'm just sharing this so that it's a bit clear the mode of work that the office used to kind of operate within, and it's basically the parts, even from something that is more narrow than the realm of architecture. It departs from something as simple as building information modeling. It's a process that is very regular among architects. When the building is being built, it consists of a lot of elements, and because of that complexity, it's just useful to store all of that information in one what is called BIM file. And we just applied that same logic of building models that store a lot of information, and that information is for one or another reason important and relevant for us within a 3D model. Sometimes those things would be spiced up by narratives or some sort of spin on that model that has some sort of more storytelling aspects. In this case, this was the work when we made a vacuum cleaner draw a portrait of a woman. And you see the blue thing on the top, which is kind of the little vacuum cleaner going around her, making this Da Vinci man-like portrait of her, which again has to do with questions of stacks and how information from these smart home devices travels and what kind of data that it transmits and so on. The work that you saw before is mostly this kind of future-oriented, hopeful, trying to kind of improve things in terms of trying to understand the critical issues of the day and somehow engage with them. We had one project that was quite kind of history-oriented. This is the site of Babyn Yar, which in the beginning of 2019 we started to model from these topographic maps from the beginning of the century. We basically modeled the site of one of the most important locations of the Holocaust in the territory of Ukraine. And through these models, we helped to understand exactly how those events happened. Here you can see the two models before and after the ravines of Babyn Yar, which is where these horrible shootings of Kyiv Jews happened. And you can see how through topographic model you can see the erasure of the history. So our work was to stare at these images and little bushes and little elements of the terrain and basically come to something like this, which is we identified key elements of the landscape, and through understanding this landscape and seeing that this hill is visible from many different angles, basically figuring out where all these photographs are taken from and understanding this terrain much better than even people who studied this site through all their life knew. So before we started this work among historians, there was still argument over where these shootings took place, and different theories were located over 1 kilometer away from one another, which is quite strange. So this is very simple kind of modeling, which resulted in this element where you can directly pinpoint the location from which these photographs were taken. And then, of course, we finally were able to map this back on the contemporary Kyiv. And this was kind of the only work of this nature, but again, it involves the same logic and involves the same type of thinking, where the modeling is there as something that connects this kind of network of actors that are engaged in the story that we're trying to understand. And somehow it turned out that this work was quite important for stuff that we do now, because of course, because of the war, we suddenly started to investigate cases of civilian violence against civilian infrastructures, and this is something that we do now. We started doing this in the night of 24th of February, so we were already on a kind of calls with my team, and we were trying to understand where these rockets came from and how exactly something happened that was happening on the first nights. But the first case study that we did was actually about the same place. If you can see here, there's a TV tower on the bottom from the photograph, and it was directly built in the 70s on top of this terrain. So this flattened landscape, it then kind of was a place where Soviets decided to build this TV tower. The TV tower was, of course, bombed in the beginning of the war, and we looked at it as our first case. But I just like, from historic perspective, this building is quite interesting because it was first planned for Moscow. They didn't like the design, so they had to keep it for some other more peripheral city of the empire. And of course, because it was planned to be taller than the Ostankino Tower that is now stands in Moscow, it had to be reduced in size and built only after the Moscow Tower would be finished. And yeah, this is the view from my office to the tower, and this is what happened on the March 1st. It was not the only attack on the TV tower in Ukraine. In fact, the attacks against this telecommunication networks were quite widespread. I think there were like more than 16 attacks that we recorded, and there were different ones. There was one attack that actually happened before the war, but in any case, what we wanted to understand is simply what exactly happened, why did the civilians die as a result of this, and we managed to reconstruct this together with forensic architecture. Basically, with a lot of detail modeling this particular attack and finding on this footage little pixels that are actually quite invisible if you look at the original footage, but then we were able to basically do something like this, which looks at this particular second missile that missed the tower and hit the pedestrian sidewalk where 5 people were at the time. So those people are blurred here on this footage. It's also interesting to note that this building that was in front of which this happened was meant to be a Holocaust museum. And there, of course, is an irony of denazifiers hitting one of the biggest Holocaust sites. The other case that we did was the attack on Mykolaiv government building, and this was the attack where there was much less footage. We had this one video where you could see the missile in the mid-flight, and it turned out that that meant that we have 18 different photographs of this missile. And at the same time, we knew exactly where this photograph was taken from, so we modeled this particular city and the trajectory of the missile and helped to identify it. And the company, the kind of non-profit that we did this with, called Truth Hounds, based on some of our findings, were able to locate exactly the ship from which this missile was launched and basically even name the crew of the ship and the captain. So suddenly we're doing this work, and I even don't know in which particular capacity. We do this in partly in partnership with Forensic Architecture, and they have their own record of working with kind of judiciary processes, and we're also deeply engaged with that. We're currently based in Berlin in the building of ECCHR, which is a human rights organization that supports different types of judiciary processes on, human rights violations and stuff like that, and they consult us from that perspective. We also, this TV tower thing was done partly together with New York Times, who then wrote a piece about it, and there's another kind of realm of basically newsmaking and trying to make people aware of what's going on in Ukraine. But one other topic that somehow I'm thinking about quite a lot these days is the topic of memory. And it's actually, shout out to Kia Kreutler, who also gave her talk here. I think was one of the most recent talks. And she reminded me the story about the Theater of Memory, which is basically Giulio Camelo's architectural proposal to build an amphitheater to store all human knowledge in it. And the reason that is kind of resonating is because currently we're working on an investigation of a Mariupol drama theater airstrike, which happened on the 16th of March. And that particular incident is very special because, and like the level to which we focus on it now is beyond the cases that we did in the past. It's kind of, we kind of spend all our time on it. And the reason it's special is because in a way it's a very central location for Mariupol. And also Mariupol in its essence somehow, because it's a frontier and because it's this kind of city that is on the border, it has a lot that can help understand Ukraine and can help understand this war. So again, as architects, specifically architects who try to avoid architecture as much as possible, we now are in this very kind of directly related to architecture setting where, of course, the first thing we did was to build a model of the theater because we found these beautiful drawings. And the model is very instrumental for us. In fact, it is a bit of that theater of memory where the digital model simply works as a backdrop for us to drop different layers of information on and to help basically systematize the archive in that way, making it spatial. So for example, these are the media files that we are collecting. We now have over 1,500 different photographs, some from historic times before the theater was built and some from the time now when Russians are occupying Mariupol and using the ruin in their own strange ways. So for example, this is the promenade that leads to Theatrical Square, the way it's called now. But what you see on top is, of course, the central church of Mariupol that was then exploded by Bolsheviks in 1937. In, by the way, the biggest wave of anti-Ukrainian killings. The same year, like pretty much all Ukrainian intelligentsia was killed. And this ruin actually also is, in a strange way, reminiscent of the ruin of Mariupol Drama Theater. Then the theater is being built, this kind of Soviet grandeur. Today I looked at it and it was built 3 years after HKV was built, which kind of, I thought that's quite strange. Working with it so closely, you can see how this kind of historization of buildings deforms the perception of them. By the way, the frontal part contains a curious sculptural group with muses that are all singing and looking at the three figures who are a coal digger, metal worker, and a bread picker, the Soviet working class, who basically is in the center and who welcomes people who pass by this building. And this building is in the center of one of the important streets in Mariupol, in a way that also explains why people went there and explains, you know, this location that takes the spot of the biggest church in the city. You can imagine how that works on a psychological kind of image of the city and people who pass by this view every day. Also, 2 days before the invasion, there was an anti-war protest there with a lot of people. And then, of course, this happened, the explosion. There is the footage from what's happening there now, this is a Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 4 performed in front of the theater, guarded by this militants, Russian militants, and also you can see the unimportant people there behind the fence. Kind of, you can, even from this, you can see some of the structural aspects of occupied Mariupol, and the theater is being reconstructed now. Now this curtain is closed and there's something going on there that is quite hard to understand. This is the ruin. Some of these photographs, of course, we locate against the model in a lot of detail, actually using the same algorithm that we developed for Babyn Yar. These images are quite important for us because they also help our explosion expert to interpret the way the building got destroyed. So this kind of black spot on that back wall of the building, he calls a fingerprint of the bomb. And we're trying to, again, reconstruct in a lot of detail what's going on. Yeah, these are just located images against the model. Sometimes this media archive elements that, in this case, come from Russian propaganda are being turned into evidence by, just making photogrammetry from that particular model. And again, here you can see cracks on walls, which are important for us. Yeah. What I said, it's just a mode of work, right? You have this architectural model, you have these photogrammetries, you locate certain images, you try to understand the damage of the building, so, the way it was exploded and what exactly happened and where were the most dangerous spots around this building. And to do this, we also got amazing help. And the help comes from the witnesses. So we've managed to identify over 65 people who were there at the theater during the war, and around 26, I think, is the number of people we already interviewed. These are Zoom interviews where you talk to these people and you ask them what happened to them, and then we bring them to our offices in Berlin and Kyiv for a round of situated testimonies, which means that we show them the 3D model of the building and we go with them through the building and we find key spots in their experience. So for instance, here, this man is modeling the space where him and his wife were at the moment of the explosion. And it's with a lot of care and attention we model these spaces, and it's quite interesting to see that they actually get quite kind of into this process. This guy didn't want to leave. He was kind of enjoying this process a lot. It's a bit like playing a game, maybe. He said he'll come back. So in the end, we produce these very subjective images of how certain people experienced the life of the theater. And I'll just say, in the beginning, we talked to all of these people, and we still are working on this. We're building this archive. We're trying to collect information about this. But then when you start to think about it more as of a story, we first basically dealt with these people, being also warned by numerous advice from lawyers that we have to be very careful to not re-traumatize people and to kind of, again, treat them with a lot of care. We thought of them as victims, and when we talked to them, the more we the more we interacted with them, the more it seemed like they're super proud over how they managed to organize and how they survived in a besieged city that doesn't have a lot of things like electricity, internet, sometimes water. They live in darkness. They have to sustain a population of almost 2,000 people at some point, which is quite crazy that the building fits that many people, and that they themselves refer to it as a commune that has volunteers and stuff like that. So the more we look at the story, the more we focus on that aspect, because of course it's important for us to understand the event of the explosion itself and where people died and how exactly things happened, and this is useful for investigation purposes. But now we think about this again as a kind of spatial archive that can host information about this whole story. And the main kind of chapter in the story for me is this chapter of self-organized commune that lived in this theater. So yeah, again, if you want to see these investigations, we publish them at investigations.support, and spatialtech.info is our Instagram handle, where we share these very quiet, but when we have new investigations, we share information about them. This is what I've got. Thank you.